Clay. Welcome back to This Is Horror.
Oh my God, I missed it. I missed it. It's been too long. It's been what, a year?
It's been a year, and
And
I
what a
think
year it has been.
yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, that's what I want to talk about actually. So the last time we spoke, it was the summer of 2022. So, what have been the biggest changes for you, both personally and professionally, in that time?
Oh my God. Um, Personally and professionally, you know, I don't want to be glib, but like I do feel like everything is feels so kind of chaotic and a bit of a in our household, it always feels like a bit of a whirlwind. I'm gonna murder my weather metaphors all night, just so you know. But I don't know. Like I have two sons, and they have become older, and as they grow, so do their foibles and their kind of needs, and you know I guess like I'm searching for the kind of best answer. Um, the biggest kind of change, it isn't so much a kind of change as much as it's just kind of an evolution of survival. I am trying desperately to kind of uh, keep everyone in our family happy and safe and healthy, and tell stories at the same time, and somehow make a living doing it. And I don't know. Yeah, everything feels a little like, I think the volume just starts to crank up, right? Like the intensity of life and the kind of like the anxiety and the fears, like everything just starts to kind of like, I don't know if it was at 3 before and now it's at 7 or 11 or 20. Like, everything just starts to, what's that metaphor? The frog and the boiling water.
Oh yeah, yeah, and the frog is unaware that it's being cooked. Yeah,
It's only when you look back and say, "Oh my gosh, the water was a lot cooler last year." Um, some people have died. Some people, like it's just funny when you think of like a year. Like you just do the cross section. You like kind of slice your life into a chunk, and you say, "What was life like before this chunk?" And you're like, "Oh, well, that person was still here. I was I was still friends with that person, maybe." Um, I don't know. Like everything, I'm kind of being mealy mouthed at the beginning, which is embarrassing. But like I don't know. Like I'm surviving, and I think maybe that's maybe the biggest kind of achievement for, nobody hates each other yet in this family. I'll say that.
right,
The
right. Which is good, because there are a lot of families where there are rivalries, there is tension, there is hatred, and if you get to that point, it's then so much harder to kind of go back or to fix it. So it's better to not get to that point to begin with.
it's so, I don't know. Like I feel so, maybe it's not embarrassment. Maybe it's a little bit of like lavender shame, pink shame. Like it's like a light hued shame, where I I've been listening to so many. Like when I think of like the show and our interviews, like I want to like, I always want to come with my best foot forward, and yet somehow I inevitably like just, I feel like I fumble, in a hopefully a charming way, but it's always that feeling of like wanting, when you like are entering the stage and you're like, okay,
Mm.
this is what it's going to be like. I'm going to do this. I'm going to say this, and then the second the curtain rises, like your shoelace is untied. That's my vibe of the moment.
Yeah, yeah, but I think, I mean, really, it's a glorious metaphor for life and indeed for story writing. I mean, we can have this plan, we can have this great idea, but then inevitably that there is fumbling, there is awkwardness, there is imperfection, but that makes it authentic and real. And I kind of think if it was polished and seem to be curated in a sense, it would be artificial. So you're giving us the realism.
I think that's all we've got, right? Like
Yeah.
I and maybe this is a terrible segue, but like I feel like there's like I've been thinking a lot about the kind of AI of it all, the kind of conversation about what separates us from the machines, and like I the only thing that I can think of personally is that idea of like the kind of rawness and the kind of the clumsiness to it, that kind of the imperfections of either our writing or whatever the art itself is, um, that makes it feel all the more uh, real, or at least makes it feel the most like you. That like I'll never make something that's perfect, and it's just a far my stuff tends to be kind of a far cry from it, but like there's at least this kind of desire to like achieve a certain rawness, or a certain kind of like tap like a specific like real emotional note, and that's something that I don't think artificial intelligence can do, and it almost feels like it's kind of giving me personally like a little bit more permission to be kind of rough around the edges and a little bit more uh imperfect. um I don't know, like I feel like probably every other 99.9% of the authors who you would talk to would say they like we're striving for that perfect sentence, or striving for that perfect like book or thing, and I almost feel like I'm kind of retreating in the opposite direction of just like, hey man, like it's a little more loosey goosey, and that's uh that's all I got, for better or for worse.
Yeah, there's so many directions that I could take this conversation in, both with what you said there and what you said a few minutes previous. But I mean, in terms of this idea of perfection, I think when we're younger, particularly, we do strive for perfection. But then as we get older, we hopefully realize that perfection is an illusion, it's a fallacy. You can't reach perfection. And actually, I mean, if you look at human beings and you look at art, there is perfection within the imperfections.
Yeah,
That is what makes somebody perfect. If we're even to use this flawed language. And I think when I realized that not only do we not necessarily have to strive towards perfection, but we need to understand that it can never be attained, we can never reach it. There's a kind of freedom. And I think it enables you to let go of stories easier as well. It's like, well, this isn't perfect, but this is good enough, or this is finished for now. And then we send it to the next stage and
yeah,
see what happens. So I mean that's kind of one strain of thought from what you've said. The other, it brings to mind what was said when we were speaking to Chuck Palahniuk, and there's almost a reaction against AI and against perfectionism, that you're bringing imperfection to the work intentionally. So sometimes he's putting intentional errors in the text to see who picks up on it. And the
yeah,
magic of that is, if you deliberately become known to be putting these imperfections in, then when you make a mistake, people don't know. Was that deliberate, or did you actually do that intentionally?
yeah. That's amazing. Little Easter eggs of imperfection. I love it. I would be so lucky to like intentionally make a mistake, when I make plenty of them kind of all unintentionally. Um, I think the problem was like I like picked up The Road recently. Like I think The Road is such a by Cormac McCarthy. I think it's a amazing book. It's probably one of the most affecting books that I've read in decades. And I it's like one of the only books that I like occasionally reread. I think there's like two or three books that I'll just like, it's time to read this book again and see if I can kind of like mine something new from it that I hadn't before. And that book has such an economy of language that I I imagine, and I have read zero Cormac McCarthy interviews, so I don't know if there's any truth to this, but I have to believe that he agonized over every single word. That like, one sentence took a day to craft, to fashion. Um and it's wholly inappropriate to compare oneself to put yourself on the scales against someone like Cormac McCarthy. But like, I do feel like when I agonize over sentences and like just try desperately to fashion the right phrase or the perfect sentence, it comes off sounding so artificial or so kind of like processed. There's like a certain kind of like prefab fiction quality to it. Um, but if I can, in lieu of spending that time agonizing over a sentence, reach the emotional core, like reach the like kind of like strike the nerve, um, that feels, it can be raw, or whatever the kind of delivery system for that emotion can be imperfect, but it still hits the cathartic point, or it still hits whatever the target is. That's that's my hope of the moment as I loosen myself up a little bit and get a little more unraveled in my writing process.
Yeah, and I think too, I mean, coming back to perfection versus imperfection, sometimes a more imperfect or inexact sentence can be what is required in that moment of the novel. And if actually you put a kind of Cormac McCarthy style sentence in, it would ring false. So actually, it being perfect would be imperfect for the novel. So we're kind of creating a paradox here. But I think we have a sense of tone and what is and what isn't stylistically and aesthetically right from each novel. And so, I mean, if I think of the novel that I recently put out that you were kind enough to blurb, so thank you very much for that, House of Bad Memories. If I were to put a Cormac McCarthy style passage while Jade, the junkie stepsister, was having a rant at her useless boyfriend Gaza, it probably wouldn't ring true. Like, hang on, what happened here? What's going on?
um, I mean, do you feel like with your writing, like do you spend the time, like, is it the Akram's razor of like what gets me like I'm telling the story, I'm navigating the narrative, as opposed to I am luxuriating in the prose. I'm like drifting through the sentences. I'm curious, like, do you have a process that kind of sees you through from project to project, story to story, book to book?
So, of course, with book to book, some will inevitably be easier than others, but the typical process is that I will plan out the story before I write anything, and it will be a plan where I loosely know how it's going to start. I know the beginning, I know the end. This is where there's most variation from project to project because some I'll almost have a chapter to chapter breakdown,
Mhm.
whereas others it is going to be like, look, this is the start, this is the middle, this is the end. I don't know exactly what's going to happen in the journey, but
Yeah.
I know where I'm going or vaguely where I'm going with each point. So I guess there's these things that we can center on to to at least make sure that I'm going there. But of course, the other problem that I find is even if I chapter by chapter plan it out, then in the first draft, it's like, oh, well, this little route, this little side mission looks like a good idea. So then that can completely change the trajectory or the idea of the story.
Yeah.
Because I've got one work in progress where it was planned out chapter by chapter. It was going to be far more commercial than anything I've written. It is a kind of Adrian Lynn inspired psychosexual thriller, but
Whoa.
then there was just a quirky character appeared, and it made it way more weird and bizarro, and it just took us down this weird rabbit hole with a calisthenic sex cult. And it's like, I think it's because like I have this idea of, oh, I could write something commercial and that might be good for my career. But it's like the reason that I got into this was almost like to scratch my own creative itch and to have fun and to do things that I think are interesting. And so yeah, it's like this constant battle that I'm having. And with that story, I've just got to write out every beat of it right now and be like, okay, what is the story that I actually want to tell? Because I feel that I'm telling three different stories now, and I need to tell, two maximum, but probably one would be better.
Yeah.
But after that, I mean, the first draft is just telling a story, getting something down. Then the second draft is me putting on a more editorial hat and me thinking, okay, how can I like tell a coherent story? How can I sort of conform to story structure or make intentional choices to not conform? Because I know there's a lot of things in House of Bad Memories where they would not advise you to do that, particularly some of the prolonged Tarantino-esque conversations. But it's like, well, I'm making a deliberate choice to not conform
Mhm.
here. And then the third draft or the third stage, that is when I am going over every sentence, every little detail. So even though, but like some people might be surprised because it's not this is not like Cormac McCarthy style writing, but I have really thought about every sentence. I have really gone over each detail. And of course, when it's gone through those three drafts or those three stages, then I send it to an editor or a publisher or a beta reader. And then their feedback, it can mean that the whole thing is reshaped again.
Yeah.
And then, like, I am very meticulous. So that will mean that it goes through the three stages again. If I've changed the structure and the dynamic, then I also have to check every single sentence. So it is a long process, but it seems to be the one that is working for me.
That's great. Just discovering your own process, like regardless of whether it's the same for book. Like, I don't know, man. Like just the idea of navigating that, discovering that. Like yeah, I feel like it changes book for book, right?
Well, yeah, there's a quote, and I'm not sure who it is that it's attributed to, but you don't discover how to write a novel, you discover how to write the novel that you're writing. And that changes every single time.
Can you imagine? I swear to God. Like I don't know. You want to create these little baby beasts, right? Like they are their own, organisms, and they're never going to be the exact same thing. They're never going to be perfect, and they're all going to have their nice little, I don't know, like it's like a hand carved box, right? Like you're
Yeah,
want those imperfections, those kind of like nicks and kinks to be a part of what makes it what it is.
yeah, yeah. Well, I'm having an interesting moment with the novel that I've just started because I would say that the first two books that I put out, the writing came quite easily. They were these stories that just kind of worked in the composition,
Yeah.
whereas a lot of things that I've written since, and of course it could tie into my personal situation, which long-term listeners will know about, and I spoke a little bit about with you off air. So it's been a tumultuous time, but I have found the last two or three stories, like novel length stories that I've written, they've become more complicated. The writing has become more difficult, and it's like, goodness, what is going on here?
Yeah.
But actually, so I've been screenwriting recently, and I adapted one of my short stories into a full length movie. And because I had expanded that story, I thought, you know what? I think what was originally a short story could be a book. So for the first time, I've adapted a short story to a film, and now I'm adapting kind of both of them into a novel. But because I've got all these pieces and because I know this world so well, it's so easy to write. It
Yeah.
is such a joy. And this doesn't happen every time. I mean, it's going to be different for different writers. Maybe that comes along, what, every 5 books, every 10 books? I don't know. But this one is very easy. So I'm just enjoying it. I'm thinking, what a moment. And it's also got me thinking, is this a weird new process? Is this a bizarre way I come up with a short story, I turn that into a movie, and I turn that into a novel? It's not a normal way of writing, but you kind of have to do what works for you.
Yeah. I mean, not to get businessy, but I mean, it is interesting how folks in Hollywood are very attuned to the idea of short stories being, seeds for features. So a lot of times, you know, folks will reach out and be like, "Hey, got any short stories? Or you should write a short story because we can turn that, we can adapt that into something." And it's maybe it's a little cart before the horse, but like it is this kind of like this process of development where a producer will want or desire the ultimate goal for them is like, let's make a movie, but we have to have a script, we have to have a story. Let's kind of plant the seed into something where we get a fiction writer to draft up, like write a short story, and that short story is kind of generated as a means to become something else. So they've already kind of like, uh, I'm cringing at myself for saying this, but like in the era of content, that something that will always have the intention of being a film is born born out of like another medium. It's a short story, or it's something else. And I don't know. It is an interesting kind of like way of going about it. And maybe I feel like stories are stories, and regardless of the medium that you tell them in, it's always nice to have a story kind of dictate what medium it wants to be in. And I occasionally get it wrong, where it's like, oh, I want to write a short story, or oh, I want to write a book. And then like somewhere along the way, it'll be like, oh, this doesn't want to be a short story. This wants to be a comic, or it wants to be a screenplay, or it just wants to be something else. But it took that kind of initial, you know, journey to kind of figure out what it actually needed or wanted it to be.
Well, I mean, it occurs to me that you haven't answered the very interesting question that you gave me, which is what is your typical, if such a thing exists, novel writing process? What does it look like for you, how many iterations does it go through before you show it to someone else?
I I mean, I'll answer the latter first. Like I'm like extremely dependent on feedback. Like I find myself needing beta readers pretty early on in the process, much to the chagrin of anyone who I ask to do it, because it's usually really raw and rough and slabby and not so put together. But I I need to kind of ask the question, like, what is this? Like, what have I done? And because I find when I answer that question for myself, like, oh, I've done this, and this is clearly what this thing is. Like, I have no friggin' clue. Like, I'm always wrong when I kind of answer the question, what is this? And like, and definitely more recently, like I stopped asking myself that question because like I usually, if I answer it for myself, it tends to be either wrong or way off base. But if I can have that conversation with a beta reader, and I can say, I've done this thing, I don't know what it is. Help me. Like, what is this? Um, and then that discussion with that beta reader, like, I read this thing and I feel like you're kind of getting at this, or maybe you're doing this. Like, it kind of allows a certain kind of uh, understanding to kind of take place for me, and I'm like, oh, okay, now and it's usually very macro, it's very general, it's like it's the kind of big picture kind of questions, as opposed to the kind of like line edit kind of like let's get granular. Like I just love those kind of larger talks up front with beta readers because it kind of informs me to what I've been doing. Because more often than not, I'm the last to fucking know. And I kind of love that. Like I love, I don't know, like I'm just letting go of understanding or even kind of answering the questions for myself, because I just feel like my answer is just so not important, so not worth it, so not like um and that's so counterintuitive to everything I feel like we've been told or taught or trained. Um, and frankly, I see other authors and I believe that they know. I believe they answer that question for themselves and that they know and that that's right. That like, you know, I have this isn't like I think of like someone like Paul Tremblay, and I love his writing. I feel like he has to know what he's doing. Because how couldn't he? It's so fucking good. It's like it's just like it is astounding what he does, that like I have to believe. I want to believe. I just want to just believe that he knows exactly what he's doing at every step of the way. And if he doesn't, I don't know if I want to know that that's true. Like I like it's safer for me to know or assume that he's in control of his writing, um, because I am losing control of my writing, and I feel like that is the process right now. I am embracing the chaos in this way that like it will lead to an it will hopefully lead to a discovery for something better or grander than maybe what I had originally intended. Um, do you listen to a band called Animal Collective? Do you know
Animal
this band, Animal
Collective.
Collective?
Animal Collective. The name sounds familiar, but I'm blanking.
I don't I'm not necessarily recommending them, but I love them. Actually, maybe I should count it. I love half of them. Half of their music to me is euphoric. It's just revelatory. Like it is the best, most amazing, life affirming music that I ever listened to. And the other half is just Drek. In my personal opinion. And that's so bad to say, because I like but I think that's what I love about them. That like they are chaos, and it's like I feel like the kind of go-to metaphor is like it's like jazz, man. Like it's like you're like free forming it, and then all of a sudden like you hit a certain kind of rhythm or a certain kind of groove, and like now we're it's like the jamming. It's like the jam band. It's like like it's like free form. We're kind of loose. We don't know where it is. We don't know where we're going. We're kind of lost at sea, and then there it is. There's the thread. We got the thread, and now we're picking it up, and it's like and and that is true, and I think that's what jazz is. But I feel like I've used the jazz metaphor a few too many times. So tonight I'm going to use the Animal Collective metaphor, which is to say, here's a band that's kind of like one of these uh, folk, funk, punk, indie kind of like just everywhere kind of things, and it's so loose and so untethered and so unmoored, and it just sounds like noise until like a rhythm kind of kicks in, or
Mm.
like something kind of comes out of it, and you're just like you've been adrift, you've been lost at sea for so long, and then all of a sudden like here's this kind of song that is kind of born out of that, and it's just phenomenal. Like once they hit that moment, and it's worth it, the whole journey, the whole ride, because it's just all of these raw elements have been kind of building up to this moment, this kind of crescendo, and it's awe inspiring, and I, for better or for worse, maybe worse, like have started to kind of write that way, where it's like I don't friggin' know. I don't know where this is going. This is the noise. This is the raw emotions that I want to play with, and like somewhere in there there is a rhythm that connects, or like a something kind of is born out of that chaos, and you just got to ride that wave until it manifests in actual tune or harmony, and then it becomes the song, and then it's like now we're playing. I just need 500 pages to find that 300 page book.
Right.
you know
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, to write something good, you often have to break a number of rules to really write something that is going to resonate. But of course, the problem is knowing which of the broken rules you can keep in and which you have to absolutely get out. And as you say, I mean, you might go on a 50-page journey to get to the scene that you really needed, but it's like how much of this journey is exciting for the readers? How much of this journey do we need to cut? And I mean, that there are numerous times, I mean, with every novel that I write, there will be chances or things that I do where I think, I don't know if I can get away with this, but literally me just delivering it to the beta reader, not mentioning what it is I've done, and seeing what comes back.
yeah
And sometimes, it will come back like, why did you do that? Or I'm not sure about that. You should probably get rid of it. Other times, no comment on it. Other times, this is the best part of the work. So I put these experiments in to see what happens. I'll keep things in sometimes that I feel, oh, maybe I should cut it. But because there's that doubt, let's see what the beta readers say.
yeah yeah no, that's, I mean, like, God bless the editors. Like if it's not the beta readers, it's definitely the kind of like I've been really fortunate. Like the last, I have two moms, um, two different editors, Rebecca and Jonte, and they're like moms to me, and they're like we're gonna raise you, we're gonna figure out how to like put you into this world, and like we've done this for going on 5 books now. We're on our fifth, and the process is always so chaotic and so kind of like by the seat of our pants, but like once they kind of like start kind of digging in with me, it becomes something. It's not the kind of one, like no one person, including myself, is kind of like uh responsible, culpable, like it's the kind of, it's the sum of all of these different kind of parts, these contributors. I don't know, like it's like it takes a village to make a book, and I I lean on my editors, maybe too much. I don't know. I'm sure they would have opinions on what the heck I'm doing and whether I'm doing it right. But it's just so funny how it's interesting how um, I I don't know. You go into this and you're like, here's this raw slab of just pure, straight up funky emotion, and we're gonna find the book in it, aren't we, guys? Right, right. you know, um, and yeah, yeah. My I'll shut up about this, I swear. But the go-to story, and I'm gonna get all the information and details wrong, so forgive me. But like, do you ever read Raymond Carver?
Oh yeah, yeah.
I do you know that, like, do you hear the story, like did you ever hear the story of like the things we talk about, oh god, what's the name of the things we talk about when we talk about when we're in love, like
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
we talk
yeah.
about when we talk about love. um I feel like the story, the mythic kind of urban legend that I've been told, is that he wrote those stories and they were bigger, longer, more kind of flowy, flowerier. um and then his editor, whose name I knew at one point and whose name I can't pull out of my head at this point, which is embarrassing, but there you go. Um, Famous editor who did a lot of amazing edits for a lot of amazing authors, took Raymond Carver's books, stories, like just cut them, like just like no 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 no, like just like whittled them down to the bone, like took all of that flowery prose out and just like just carved, whittled that shit, and it became this these are the stories as we remember them. And apparently I think Raymond Carver was like rah, 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 like, this is, how dare you, like, like really pissed that, like, that his editor, like, how dare this editor do this to his work. And but by whatever feat, whatever design, those books, those stories were either published intermittently or were kind of put out there, and people responded to them. They're like, this is amazing, this is like, and Raymond Carver had to be like, huh, like kind of begrudgingly, like, okay, fine, like, and Raymond Carver became Raymond Carver, the Raymond Carver we all know and love, um to the extent where later in life he was afforded the opportunity to republish a new edition of those stories, but the kind of director's cut version of it, like the way that he wrote them, the way that he wanted them to be. And readers kind of responded to them like tepidly, like like not as good as the first round. And I think there's just that kind of like, how telling is it that you can have, like, you know that, like, the process of like what we write as writers, like, we think this is what it is, like, this is what it like, no, this is me, this is my voice, this is my story. And an editor comes in and is like, let's get rid of all that extra additional stuff, and it hurts. It's like so frustrating, like, you want that stuff in there. um but like a great editor can kind of like know your story almost better than yourself, or can help you discover that story kind of within that freeform jazz funky mess. The funky junk.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's so interesting because I mean, if I think about minimalist fiction, as is the case with a lot of us, then I think about Raymond Carver.
Yeah.
So to find out that, actually to begin with, that wasn't what he was writing at all. And the fact that he became the father of minimalism was actually accidental. That's just incredible. And it now makes me wonder, so with the later stories, did he accept this role, as it were, as a minimalist writer, or was the process the same every single time? And his editor's like, Why aren't you learning? I'm going to cut this anyway." So that's fascinating. And now, because I haven't, I want to read the expanded version. I want to not only read it, but read them kind of consecutively and then compare them, because that is just
Totally.
fascinating.
Yeah. I want to, I'd be really curious if someone's listening to this now, whoever you may be, and you hear me regale this Raymond Carver story, and you're like, that's not the way it happened. That it totally was, like, he's got the whole story wrong. I'd be really curious if someone can kind of lead us in this moment to the right story, because I feel like it's so compelling, and like maybe I've just taken, like, I've overheard this story and I've like it's mutated and kind of like evolved into this urban legend in my own head. But I feel like that's the story, or like a very rough slipshod version of it, and I want to know what I got right or what I got wrong, because I do feel like I remember, like, the editor was like, no, 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 we're gonna, like, no, 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 and like I don't know what the decision making process was. Like, if Carver had to at some point say, "Fine, let's give it a try. Like, we'll do your version of it and see how it goes." Which is such a leap of faith for any author to take. Like, I can't imagine, like, if I was protective of my writing and an editor was like, "I'm going to take your stories and I'm going to cut them down by a third, by a half, by a however much," um and they're gonna, that is a huge leap of faith. um and at some point that trigger was pulled and Carver had to be at peace with it, maybe begrudgingly, maybe at kind of extreme emotional duress, but to then be like, "Oh wow, people really do respond to that well," and then, like, to, because I think he was kind of a bit of an egomaniac, if I'm not wrong, that, like, he was given the kind of privilege to, like, now I'm going to do it the way that I originally intended it. And I don't know. The director's cuts are never as good as the, well, am I going to say that? Is that a real statement that I'm going to make? I'm going to take that back. Usually, sometimes, more often than not, uh, when we don't have the external factors kind of giving us that friction or that tension, uh, I think when auteurs are kind of left to their own devices too much, without an extra parrot on their shoulder to be like, "Do you really want to do that? Like, I think maybe you should cut that. Those 50 pages don't need to be in the book." Um, it's left a little bit unbridled, unfiltered.
Yeah, I wonder if the reaction to the director's cut, for want of better phrasing, humbled Carver in some way. But I have a feeling, because of what we've said about his personality and what I know about him, he was probably like, "They're wrong. They just can't see this genius." What what a bizarre reaction from the critics. They cannot see this magic that is in front of them.
Um, Someone out there, please, I'm talking to you, whoever you are out there, correct me if I'm wrong on this story, because I feel like it is, I really want to believe in this story. Uh, so if I'm way off base, tell me now, because I've been trying to tell this story to people for years, and maybe maybe I've got it wrong at this point. But yeah, yeah. Did you ever see Donnie Darko?
Oh yeah, I love Donnie Darko.
Did you ever see the Donnie Darko director's cut?
I heard about the Donnie Darko director's cut. I have read about it extensively, but I haven't actually watched it. But yeah, have you watched it?
I have, and it you know I don't know if I'm like trying to make an argument that like directors need other people to tell them what to do, because I'm not saying that, but I do feel like it's always interesting when it's like, look at the director's cut versus the theatrical release, or I think I love the original. When I was in my 20s and I first saw Donnie Darko, I loved the theatrical cut, and then to be given the kind of privilege, the opportunity to like have a director's cut, like, oh my god. um and it'd be like, oh, that's what that was like the shape of Donnie Darko was lost to me. The kind of, it became a kind of amorphous state that like it lost some of its contours in a way that I felt, I really, it left me kind of wanting the original. Um, but yeah, that's a digression, because I'm like trying to make this argument in my head right now of like, when is it good to have people on your side, telling like kind of focusing on like making that thing, versus like the unbridled, like, I'm calling the shots. I don't need anyone else's. I don't need an editor, damn it. Don't tell me how to cut this movie or this book.
Yeah, I think with Donnie Darko in particular, one of the things that makes the first iteration so fascinating is that there are multiple readings, there are multiple interpretations of the film, and like a lot of good films, that ambiguity leads to these fascinating conversations where you can never 100% say this person's interpretation is right. You can choose the interpretation that you think aligns best to the story and aligns best to your point of view, but there'll always be that room for ambiguity. Whereas with the director's cut, it's like, this is the story, this is what happened.
Yeah,
There is no room for ambiguity. And so I would argue, and some people would disagree with this, but I think films and books are better when there is a level of ambiguity, when there are multiple interpretations. Now, of course, in storytelling, you have to answer central questions, you have to close, most of the plot, but it's like, even if it's just a minor thing, let's leave something open to
yeah,
interpretation. Let's leave something partially answered, or answered in such a way where you can question, was this actually what happened?
yeah,
And I think, you know, some would say that Shutter Island, the movie, is superior to the book because the movie has ambiguity as to how that ends and what is going on, whereas the book gives you a pretty clear cut answer.
yeah. It's true. Um, God, I love. Why do I love the movie Shutter Island so much? I watched that, is like such a comfort film to me. Like, if it's on, if I see it, I just find myself wanting to watch it. Um, yeah, there, minor digression. I Yeah, to your point, like, with Donnie Darko, uh, the director's cut explains everything, almost everything. And it's like it takes away the ambiguity to such an extent that it takes away my interpretation of it. And all of a sudden it's like, oh man, now you're telling me what you think the story is, and it's negating my personal experience with the original cut, and therefore, like, was that wrong? Like, was I wrong? And it's hard. It's a little bit like, and like, I know we're saving what kind of mother talk for hour two, but like, I I feel like I kind of programmed a bit of the kind of level of ambiguity that's in that book uh, is confounding for certain readers. Like people are really kind of angry at it for being as uh, ambiguous as it is. Um, so like yeah, it's a strange kind of balance, right? Like you want to lead people towards an interpretation, and then you want to kind of allow that interpretation to be correct, so that a million people can have a million different interpretations of the same source material, the same book, the same movie, the same whatever. uh, but like you're right and you're right and you're right and like everybody's right because the filmmaker has made it so, or the novelist has made it so that like it's permissible to have those interpretations, and no one is right more than the other. um but it's yours. I don't know, like that's I love it when a book or a movie allows me the chance to kind of be like, well, this is what I think, without telling me, no, this is what it is. This is what it's really about.
Yeah, yeah. Well, you mentioned Paul Tremblay earlier, and I think again that is one of the things that makes a head full of ghosts. One of the things that makes a head full of ghosts such a brilliant story because
Yeah.
you can read this on a supernatural level, or you can read it on a nothing supernatural happens. It works both ways.
It totally does. And it's so like all the way to the end. Is it? Is it really? Is it not? Is it? Is it not? And I just love it. Um and that's why, like, I think Head Full of Ghosts is a great example of ambiguity and the kind of tension that creates. Where like I feel like Paul Bearer's Club, the ambiguity of that really made a lot of, or I guess like a certain cross section of readers really angry. Like they were mad at him for that. And I just found that like so amazing that like he's kind of, I, I, I don't know if this is true, but like I imagine him kind of relenting a certain, uh, like he is in control of that book, but he's kind of like relaxing his grip on it to the extent that like it's permitting readers to kind of come in and have their interpretation, and they want to look to Paul and they want to ask him like, is this what's happening? Is this right? Am I right in assuming this is what it is? And Paul's like, hey man, I don't know, what do you think? And like they get mad at that, they get mad at him for that. I've read some of those Goodread reviews and those Amazon reviews, and it's astounding like how irked people can be when they have the privilege to come to interpret material and not have it like tied in with a nice neat bow. Friggin' the Pallbearers Club is like the most ambiguous book of that like scale that I've read in a long time, and I just love it. And people are so mad at it. Like it's phenomenal. Like kudos to him, man.
I think the Paul Bearers Club is the most divisive Paul Tremblay book. And
Absolutely.
of course, there's the ambiguity. But I think another reason why it's so divisive is now, of course, before he wrote horror, he was writing crime fiction. But then, very much with A Head Full of Ghosts and the success of that, it cemented Paul Tremblay as the horror guy
Yeah,
with things like The Cabin at the End of the World and Survivor Song that just went towards saying, you know what, Paul Tremblay is horror. But then with the Paul Bearers Club, it was like in the best possible way, he didn't give a fuck. And
yeah,
he was like, I'm going to write this thing that, you could essentially categorize as a fictionalized memoir.
yeah,
It is the quietest of his horror pieces,
yeah,
although there is obviously, yeah, for very obvious reasons, horror within it, but it's so understated and subdued. It's like it's like if everything else was the rock album, that this is his acoustic set.
Yeah. Totally.
And it just seemed like he's doing this so confidently and in a positive way with little regard for how other people are going to take it. It's like, look, take it or leave it. This is what I'm doing. And I think that is exciting because that shows that every Paul Tremblay book, you won't know what you're going to get with it. And I think, like actors might not like being typecast, I suppose writers don't always like being put into a box and being like, you're the horror guy, this is what you do. And it's like, well,
Yeah.
surprise, motherfucker, because this ain't just what I do. And you got the Paul Bearers Club.
Yeah. Oh my god. Um, it also makes me think of Blade Runner and the fact that, like, what are we up to now? There's like four different versions, four different director's cuts. There's like the theatrical release, there's the director's cut, there's the, I think there's like something called like the ultimate cut. Like there've been just so many different kind of versions of it that it's a little confusing to me to kind of like even know what Ridley Scott assumed, like says is the kind of like, this is the definitive version, because there've just been so many. And I feel like I know one version he took out the what is it that he took out the voiceover? Was it am I getting this story right? In the original version there's the voiceover, and then he takes the voiceover out in the director's cut, or one of the director's cuts. And then it becomes more ambiguous as to like what's going on and how the story unfolds. Am I telling this story right? I probably am not. And someone better take me to task for this. But like I just love the fact that like that movie, which in of itself I think is a pretty ambiguous film. I mean, there's like a road that leads you to an interpretation if you so choose to kind of take it. But like by taking the voiceover out, he's kind of permitting, he's like taking the training wheels off, and he's like, no, you got to ride this bike. Like you've got to come up with your own interpretation, your own understanding of what this film is. And that's scary for people. It's scary to interpret stuff. It's scary to like, because what if you're wrong? Like, what if I'm wrong? Like, what if he's not a replicant? Like, is Deckard like? Could I be wrong? Like, is it okay to be wrong? I don't like. That's what's great about interpretation. Is it a vampire? Is Paul Bear's Club about vampires, or is it not a vampire? Like, I don't know. Like maybe she's possessed, maybe she's not possessed. I don't know. Like, it like like we want that bow so badly. We want things to be wrapped up so neatly that like if there's no bow, if there's no gift wrap, like you're kind of it's like, I don't know. You tell me, man. Like, is she possessed? Is it a vampire? Is he a replicant? It's so like oh, it's such a like privilege to be given that permission to do that. But like on the reader's side, on the audience member side, it's so scary because you wanna be right, and you wanna believe, you wanna get the ending that everybody else gets. So it's like, you know, you're kind of like, I think Deckard's a replicant. Am I right? I think she's a vampire.
Yeah, I think as well, when I'm thinking about angry readers and angry critics, sometimes they can be annoyed or they can say a piece of art is not good because it wasn't the story that they wanted to be told.
Yeah.
And it's like, yeah, but the story that you wanted wasn't the story that the director or the writer or the filmmaker wanted to tell. So actually, when I first watched Jordan Peele's Us, I was a bit disappointed when it turned into more a slasher movie because I wanted to learn more about the family. I wanted to see the family dynamic and all that tension that was set up. But so for a while, I felt like, Us has disappointed me a little bit, but it's like, no, it's a really good film.
Yeah.
It's just not doing what you wanted it to do. And unfortunately, Jordan Peele doesn't consult me and be like, is this okay? Are you okay with that story, Michael? Is that the one that you want? Probably doesn't even consult you, and you've made a few with him.
But if you think of that moment in time, like what an interesting kind of nexus of in terms of his career, because like we're talking about reader expectations, audience expectations, like to come off of Get Out with Us, like there is that moment that we all watched Us for the very, very first time, and it undermined our expectations nearly at every step, because everybody going into that movie wanted Get Out too, or they wanted something, they wanted something kind of akin to Get Out. And Us is its own beast, it's its own creation, its own story that has kind of the genetic makeup akin to or similar to Get Out. I mean, it is a Jordan Peele film. Like you feel, I feel like it. You sense Jordan within it, um, but it is so wholly, entirely its own that like you react to it in this kind of uh this is not Get Out. It's like it kind of like you're reacting against it. It's like no, like you want to kind of push back on it. It's like no, this is, I don't want this. I want Get Out. I want this. You're not giving me what I want. And like you're mad at it. You're mad at the movie, which is why I feel like when if you give it a second watch or a third watch, like the movie, it's like the movie it's like it becomes what it is for you. Like it's like you need to let Get Out go. You need to kind of like wash Get Out off so that you can kind of come to Us as this film as on its own terms. um and I remember doing that with like uh the Big Lebowski. I know this is a author podcast and interview, and I'm like using all these film references. Forgive me, but like everybody loved Fargo, the feature film. Like Fargo came out, and it kind of like it became its own kind of pop culture moment. So the next movie that the Coen brothers did, who I love the Coen brothers, uh, we go to see the Big Lebowski, and it's what is this? What is this thing that we're watching? Like it's a mess. It's a sprawling kind of like just fiasco, and it makes no sense. I don't understand it. And like people were kind of like grumpy about it. Like they rejected it. They like pushed back against it. But to this day, every time I watch the Big Lebowski, it reveals itself to me in these ways that are just so kind of like miraculous. It's like so awe-inspiring. Like I love the Big Lebowski, and it's just so kind of it's interesting to me that like you can kind of watch something and your audience expectations, your reader expectations are like, this is what I want. This is the story that I want, and this novel, this movie is not giving it to me, and I reject it. I push back. No, I don't like this. And it's such a bummer because it's not the movie's fault. It's not Lebowski's fault. It's not the dude's fault. It's the fact that like we have these preconceived notions of what we want, that when the story tells itself the way that the story tells itself, we're not accepting it on those terms, and that's hard. Like you have to let go. You have to kind of like meet each book, every movie on its own terms, even if it's the same author, even if it's like the Paul Tremblay of the Paul Bears Club is not the same Paul Tremblay of Survivor Song. It's not the same as Cabin in the End of the World. And like that's amazing. That's amazing that he can kind of reinvent himself with each book. But you as the reader have to kind of meet him halfway. You have to you have to let go of um, a head full of ghosts, which is so hard. You want a head full of ghosts. I wanted a head full of ghosts, but you have to like get it out, shake it out.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.